Hormats, would you like to comment that this, you've heard all of these speakers?
Sure.
Dr. Hormats is the Undersecretary of State in the Department of State responsible for energy environment.
Well, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure for me to be here, and I have listened very carefully. My role is to try to comment on and sort of sum up a few of the key themes, which is challenging because there have been so many of them. But let me try to focus on 3 points that I think are particularly compelling. Let me start out with a little story, sort of following up the French motif. And that goes to a statement that was made, or a slogan that was developed years ago by a former Prime Minister of France who was trying to get the French people to stop drinking wine. So a very difficult task, as you might imagine. So he had put up on the subways of Paris a sign, and the sign said, "Stop drinking wine, it will kill you slowly." And someone wrote in graffiti underneath that, "That's no problem, we're in no hurry." So my point now is that we need to be in a hurry, and for very much the reasons that other panelists have mentioned. This is an urgent issue. Second point I want to make, Minister Elysée made a very important point, and that is that increasingly the creativity in this area is in the cities and the states and the provinces. We in the United States refer to them as the test tubes of democracy. But I think you can say the same is true with other countries, not just in the political realm, but many of these states and cities and provinces are very innovative in the kinds of policies and incentives they have implemented in the area of environmental policy, and I would say in other areas of policy as well. Increasingly, international economic policy, increasingly environmental policy, really has to be focused on the creative developments going on, not so much in national capitals, but cities and states and provinces. And the more they can interact with one another, the more they can learn from one another. They can develop best practices. They can learn from the successes and mistakes of others. So it seems to be one new dimension of this is not just that we have these big national conclaves, but that there be a great deal more interaction among provinces, cities, and states to address these kinds of issues. I think we'd all learn from one another. So that's really one point that I want to leave with. It adds another dimension and a very dynamic dimension to this debate. And within that context, there are two areas. One is transportation, which is very important, as you say. The other is buildings and the infrastructure, because many countries are building cities at a very rapid rate. A large number of the buildings that will be constructed in these large cities that are going up in India, China, and many other parts of the world, many of those buildings have not been built yet. So we have a chance to ensure high standards, high environmental standards now, because once these buildings are built, it's very hard to retrofit them. If we can do it now and have everyone accept much better environmental standards in the way buildings are built and the way transportation systems are constructed that are being built out today and tomorrow, we can make a big difference 20 or 30 years from now. The second point I'd make relates to the slogan or the theme of this, the global challenge of resource-efficient growth and development. If you look at businesses, one of the things that businesses focused on in the past was labor productivity. How do I get the most value out of an individual worker? That is how productivity basically was measured in most of our economies and most of our economic textbooks. It seems to me now that there's a new and very important dimension, that is, how do we utilize resources more efficiently? And I would say that it's not just good environmentally, good for dealing with issues of climate change. But those companies that are more efficient in utilizing water, in utilizing energy of various sorts, in utilizing other raw materials, are going to benefit in two ways. One, that greater degree of efficiency will also go to their bottom line. It will make them more profitable. So large numbers of companies working with the Environmental Defense Fund, working with the World Wildlife Foundation, working with other groups, have looked very hard at their cost structures. How efficiently do they utilize energy, raw materials, water, and other things? And so there should be a convergence. And I think in many cases there already is a convergence between those companies that want to improve their bottom line, that want to improve profitability, and those companies that in so doing are also contributing to a better environment. And by contributing to a better environment, they're also improving their brand name, because younger people are very conscious not only of what they buy, but how it's made. Is it made on the basis of good environmental practices? Are the workplace standards for their workers in various parts of the world up to high quality standards? Basically, they want to know how it's made, and they want to be sure that it is based on good environmental practices. So for companies, it's a question of improving profitability by utilizing resources more efficiently, and it's particularly improving their brand image with younger people who were extremely focused on this issue. And the third and the last point that I want to focus on relates to the point that Sultan made a few moments ago, which I think is very important. It has been made throughout, and I think it's a theme of this conversation, and that is the relationship between water and energy and agriculture. And let me just cite a few points that I think underscore the very eloquent points that you made. And that is, we've seen, and it's important to remember, that the Green Revolution was really a revolution that was developed between an American scientist, Norman Borlaug, and an Indian scientist, Dr. Swaminathan, who really were pioneers in this area. And the progress that has been made, millions and millions and millions of lives were saved as a result of this. But to meet tomorrow's food needs, we need to support continued innovation in different dimensions. And that is, let's just cite a few thoughts. One, the agricultural sector currently consumes about 70% of the planet's accessible fresh water. About 40% of the water used in irrigation is wasted, resulting in lower groundwater levels and agricultural runoff that pollutes rivers and streams. And as groundwater levels decrease, more energy is required to pump water for immigration. And the demand for water is doubly increased because energy production, like agriculture, has a very large water footprint. So you get this sort of vicious cycle of water scarcity, and as it relates to all these other factors in terms of lower water tables require more energy requires more water, and if there's less water available and it's more expensive, it becomes a problem for farming, and water wastage, therefore, is a key element that intertwines with all these things. And one of the things that I want to underscore here, particularly because we're in India, but the same could be true of any other country, is that one of the difficult challenges we all face is post-harvest losses. This is a major problem because food loss also is water loss, because the water goes into producing the food, and it's also energy loss because a lot of energy goes into producing the food. If you could avoid or reduce dramatically post-harvest food losses, it would be good for agriculture, good for water, and good for energy. And currently, a shocking 1/3 of global agricultural production is lost due to inefficient processing, spoilage, insects, rodents, and other avoidable factors. And the recent World Bank study has found that grain losses in sub-Saharan Africa totaled a staggering $4 billion annually. And the implications of this are enormous from a resource point of view. So one of the things that strikes me we really ought to focus on in India and many other parts of the world as well, because we have those in our own country, many other countries do, is to focus very, very directly on how we can dramatically reduce food harvest, post-harvest food losses through cold chain storage, through a wide variety of other techniques. This would benefit farmers, and this goes to the question of fairness. Farmers lose dramatically when a lot of their crop is lost. Consumers lose because they don't have the advantage of a greater degree of abundance in the area of food, but also it has severe environmental effects, severe impact on wastage of water, wastage of energy. So it strikes me that that should be a very important priority as well. So when you add it all up, it is a greater degree of interaction among cities and states so they can learn from one another and establish the best environmental practices by learning from one another's experience, encouraging companies to look at good environmental practices as good business practices, as both profitable from their point of view and good for the environment. And third is to focus very directly on an issue that we can all deal with, which is post-harvest food losses, which will have an enormous set of benefits for poor people, for consumers, for farmers, for consumers, and also very beneficial impact on the environment. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.